I would like to take you on a hopefully magic journey through, yeah, learning games, especially for children, and what kind of magic or what kind of magic plays when it comes to learning. So, when we think of magic in connection to children, we quite often think of fairy tales, first of all. So, fairy tales are something children come into contact quite early. They are read as bedtime stories, seen on many media. So let's have a look, first of all, some elements of magic in fairy tales and also in fantasy stories. First of all, you have contrasts, so quite often good versus evil, rich versus poor, and so on. You have talking animals. You have names of the main characters like Snow White, for example, or Sleeping Beauty that relate to the story or their looks. Numbers also play an important role, like the magic of 3 or 7. We have got the 7 dwarfs. We have got maybe 3 wishes or 3 tasks to fulfill, and things like that. So you have a good person being in a difficult situation, and magic quite often can help. You also have quite often objects like the magic mirror, for example, that plays a role. And you do not find magic or modern objects in these stories very often, even if it's a modern kind of fairy tale like Harry Potter. When they are in Hogwarts, you don't find any modern objects there. So fairy tales play an important role, not only in European culture, but in all over the world, I would say. Of course, fairy tales differ, but they are a big part for children, also for adults, because we know them from our childhood. So what about the protagonists of fairy tales? So you have, especially for the European fairy tales, always a poor, quite often poor, but brave and resourceful hero or heroine. And they have to go on a journey. They have to do some risky trials and have to fulfill some difficult tasks. And then they kind of, yeah, get wealthy or get to marry the princess or whatever. When it comes to children, these protagonists play a very important role, not only fairy tales, but magic characters in general, because children need role models. And when we have a look, there are some studies having a look at children's and their role models and heroes, heroines of childhood. They are chosen out of media. So that might be films, of course, books, but also, of course, video games, whatever they have access to. And quite often, either these are these kind of normal role models, but quite often they have to do with magic. And of course, these magic characters, when we have a look in fairy tales, but also in other fantasy stories, we always have these good versus evil. We have the good ones and we have the evil ones. Quite often, it's really this black and white. There's not much in between. And for children, these stories are very important because they already offer a certain orientation for their own life. So that even maybe the smaller ones can win over the big and mighty ones, and they can play really important roles. So first of all, children like to identify with the figures, even if they know maybe I'm not a fairy, I can't be a magician, I do not have the superpower to fly. But if you watch children, they like to act as if, of course. So they want to identify with all these magical ones, not very often with the evil ones, but with the good ones. And these protagonists, so these heroes and heroines in these magic stories, are also used from children to protect their own needs, their worries, and their emotions on them. So all these characters have to master really difficult tasks. They maybe feel lonely, they miss something in their life. So it's something children quite often can relate to and feel kind of comforted. So I'm not the only one, or maybe there are other characters who are far worse off than me. So it's also a way of finding orientation and different ways of acting. So I can say this role model or this hero in this story acts like that. So maybe I should try it in a similar situation, of course, not in a fairy tale situation, but in a similar situation like that. So to be brave or to kind of dare something, or even if it seems to be very difficult task, just to try and to rely on friendship, for example. So this is the one part. So magic and fairy tales are very important for children's development. But what about the role of magic for learning? If you have a look at literature, you will find two different kind of ways how magic is treated when it comes to learning. First of all, you can really try to use magic in your lessons or in your teaching as well. So you as a teacher can do magic tricks, and your pupils, your students can learn how to do magic. So when pupils, children, also older students learn how to do magic, studies have found out that it helps, of course, for the motor skills, because if you have ever tried to do a magic trick, you really have to be very quick, you have to be very skillful, you have to practice quite a lot. So that helps for motor skills. But it also helps for developing self-esteem, imagination, of course, and creativity. And it also helps for teaching critical thinking. So that's the one thing how you can bring magic into teaching. But of course, the other way, and this is by far more common to use, is to use stories or fairy tales or any kind of magic, stories, to bring them into your lesson and to do something with that. Especially fairy tales have been used quite for a long time in training, in education. Of course, as we know, traditional fairy tales always tell the story that the good ones, the brave ones, the virtue is rewarded, and the bad ones, the evil ones, they're always punished. So fairy tales, originally, they were written for adults, not for children. They were always used and are still used for moral education. Just to think of, it's always the lazy sister that does not get rich or whatever, but the one that's hardworking gets, in the end, all the rewards. Fairy tales are also used really in school subjects. So they're quite frequently used to teach foreign languages, because fairy tales are quite well known in the native language, so it's easier for children to understand them in foreign languages as well. And of course, you get authentic material if you just use, for example, if you want to teach English as a foreign language and you use Snow White as a children's book edition, it's easier for children to understand who are just starting to learn a language. But fairy tales are also used to teach, for example, mathematics. So there's quite a lot of mathematics in fairy tales, not only these magic numbers. They are also used for geography. They can be used for teaching history. They can be used for teaching nearly everything. So if you have a look around, I think there's nearly no subject which has not tried to use fairy tales for teaching. Fairy tales as original tales, of course, as stories written or told, are one thing, but as we know, stories, especially the good ones, do not keep to oral tradition or just to written tradition. They change the medium quite often. Let me give you example, I think all of you know Harry Potter. Harry Potter started out as a book, then was transformed into films. We have got, apart from the movies, we have got the games, of course. We have fun parks with the theme of Harry Potter. We have quite a lot of merchandise and so on. So a good story that is liked by a lot of people, of course, just is not related to just one medium. You have this kind of cross-media storytelling. You have this convergence culture, as it's often called. And of course, that's also true for the traditional fairy tales. Here you have got 3 examples of not learning games and not games for children, which are based on fairy tales, basically. I think you can easily recognize that it's about Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, of course, different versions to make them playable, and Child of Light, of course, which is also typical, based on fairy tale, where this little girl has to set out to find her way back home and to rescue sun, moon, and stars from the evil queen, from the dark queen who has imprisoned sun, moon, and stars. So that's something that's not very uncommon, that fairy tales, of course, leave their books and are transferred to films or games. But what about learning games? Yeah, so how do they use magic, and what kind of magic is used in learning games? I have had a look at some of the examples. I will briefly show you some examples of really learning games, most of them for children, so really wanting to teach something. And we will have a very brief look at the role magic plays in these games. Let's start with this one. It's Dragon Box Elements Geometry Proofs, which, of course, you can see from the name, it's about geometry. It's a mathematical game. And if you have a look at the screenshots, you can see kind of small monsters or fantasy figures. And it's just about, really, for children from the age of 4 to 5, so very, very early, you can start with that. And it has the story setting, the background setting, that you need to build an army out of geometrical shapes. And with this army, you have to defeat the evil one. So we have, on the one hand, again, this story, good versus evil, where, of course, the player is part of the good ones. He wants to defeat the evil ones, and that's only what you can do with these shapes. So and each of the shapes has different character traits, so you can different skills, and they have their own power, their magical power. So it's important that you learn to differentiate between a triangle and a square, and the circle, and so on. So that's what the games, the Dragon Box games, generally are very good at, to teach that without saying, okay, this is kind of really the mathematical language. So what happens here, it's just kind of giving a first idea, but it's set in a magic world. Yeah, it could have been kind of, no shapes are everywhere. They could have also used buildings and tried to find shapes in a house where is a triangle and whatever, but they used the magic. They used this kind of story children already know, good versus evil. A second example, which is about learning English as a foreign language, is Visadora. You can see from this screenshot, Visadora is this kind of, wizard or fairy or whatever you want to call her. You can see also her hat on the table, and her magic wand, of course. And Visadora leads children through this game, where they have you have this magic map where you can travel to different parts of Great Britain, and there you have to fulfill different tasks. So kind of mini games, and you have also kind of the school of magicians, or the magic school, where you just can find out, train some vocabulary. The interesting thing in this game is that magic is just kind of very, very, yeah, just not like in the game before, the center of the story, but you just have Visadora, who of course magically can do things, and have maybe the pots and the pan flying in the air. But if you play the mini games, it's just very, very normal. So for example, you have to go into a football stadium and help them to help the team to win their game by bringing them the ball and whatever. So that's more kind of everyday life story. So the magic here really is just a bit of magic to set the story and to bring these two characters to the places. The language magician, on the contrary, which is not really a learning game, but more for assessing the second language learning or foreign language learning skills of children, includes magic also in the kind of gameplay. Because so the story is, we have again the bad wizard who turned all the animals into door knockers, and you as the player, you're the young magician. He has just to try to turn all the animals back by answering, doing some tasks in English. So listen to words and write them, or find the correct vocabulary, whatever. And what you also have to do is, in this game, which I find really nice to bring a bit more empowerment and magic into the game, is that you have to move your magic wand and to cast a spell. So it's not just like we heard before, but it's just press the button and then the magic spell happens. Here you really have to do the movement with your magic wand. So it's something a bit more that the magic really goes through all the game, and it also tries to empower the children really, okay, so they can do something. It's not like in the game before that Visadora is just the only one who can do magic, but the player basically can't do any magic. A completely different game is this one, Outbreak Squad, which is kind of, I think, a very modern game in times of Corona, because you have the superheroes here, as you can see. They are disciplines, scientific disciplines, and as a player you have to fight diseases. It's not Corona, it's foodborne diseases. And these diseases are pictured as monsters, and these superheroes stand for research, enforcement, healthcare, and education. And the player has to decide which superhero should he take in the next round, and how much power should he use to defeat the monster. So basically, it's also something that not you as the player do the magic, but you can help the heroes to do the magic here. So, and just having a look at the last example I want to give you, which is not only for children, it's more for adults, I think, but a nice example of kind of a learning game, because you can learn how to type words faster. Maybe you know it, it's Epistory Typing Chronicles, which is basically about, the story is about a writer who lacks ideas, and you as the player can influence the story. And of course, you also have to battle enemies, which are also kind of all kind of fantasy creatures. And how can you battle the enemies? yeah, you have to type in words which appear above the heads of the the enemies when they start to attack you. And of course, the ones who are, yeah, the stronger ones have longer and more complicated words you have to type in. And the easier to defeat ones have just maybe one letter or two letters, but they come in maybe dozens or whatever. So it's not just about typing, it's also that you have to use a bit of strategically thinking for your typing here. And when you type the words, or depending on where you go, you also develop the story. So that's, of course, something where you do magic with your keyboard, basically. But I think it's also kind of an example where you, as the player, are empowered, and you can do so. You have the effect of a bit of a magician. So what I wanted to show you there, magic, I think, plays an important role in learning games. So these were just some examples of learning games who use fairy tales or magic in their stories or in their characters. And of course, it has a reason, especially for the younger ones, because magic and fairy tales are connected to children's lives. But you can see, when it comes to the game design, quite often these fairy tales and magic is very just kind of a layer, or just the characters, or a bit of background stories. So it does not really match the magic, what we see as magic. So really that I'm empowered and can do magic. Okay, so thank you. I hope I managed to do in time. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to discuss with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonja. How you did the twist to serious games and magic was really brilliant. And I asked my magic ball, and I think that Nikolaus has a question for you.
Hi, Sonja, it's me again.